and people will start flowing in and you can start saying hello to your friends. So I'm in the Boulder Theater today, guys. Have you all ever been here before?
No, you're in Boulder today. You were somewhere else last time we talked.
Yeah, I was on the road to deposit my son into his first real world job out in Avon, Colorado, and I decided I'd swing back through Boulder and do this from here today. It's gonna be fun. This is a cool building. I mean, how could it not be? It's in downtown Boulder.
I've never been.
Really? To Boulder or to the Boulder Theater?
Either, actually. I've been to Denver, but not Boulder.
Yeah. It's really cool. Where are you guys located today?
So I'm in Princeton, New Jersey, and RJ is in, what's that called?
Right outside of Philadelphia.
Junction, no, what's your station? Something station.
Station. It's just called Station.
RJ,
Marion Station.
RJ, since you live near Philly, did you go to the Fish Show at the Met in December, the special?
I did. So did Tom, yeah.
I was there also. What a treat that was.
That was fun.
You know, it was so incredible. I don't know if you all noticed this or not, but because they only gave away tickets in pairs, you know, no one could get 4, 6, 8 or whatever. You picked your best friend in the whole world to go, and consequently, it felt like a couple's retreat for a fish show. Every guy was there with his main mate. Very few girls were there, at least from what I saw.
Huh.
It was a lot of fun.
That's very true.
Now, you guys may have gotten more than a pair of tickets. I only got a pair.
Not me. I just got a pair.
Yep.
For local shows, I tend to bring the family. Yeah, I usually get around 4 if I can. Although that one I think was tight. Tickets were tight for that show. The Met.
It sure was. What a cool venue. Anyway, we're 1 minute out.
Cool.
And I'm really excited.
Tom, is my sound all right from here?
Yeah, perfect. And mine?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Battery's charged on my little, this Bose thing.
I have a little bit of a studio here in my office with some, some sound absorption.
Sound mitigation.
All right, gentlemen, we're rolling.
All right.
Welcome to the 24th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing. We are shining a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and helping them share stories from their careers, lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I am thrilled to present 2 amazing music industry entrepreneurs and 1 iconic venue. And if you know anything about me and my passion for the band Fish, you will quickly realize why I am so excited about this program today. Before I get started, let me take care of a little bit of business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work that they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Some of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. So in this series, my goal is to help you make such connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those during today's program as possible. I also want to thank our sponsors. Without their financial support, we could not do what we do. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Four Roses Bourbon, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. So let's get down to business. Today, I am pleased to broadcast my portion of the program from the venerable Boulder Theater in Boulder, Colorado. This historic venue has a diverse and colorful past that continues with a thriving present as one of the premier concert venues in the nation. Opened in 1906 as the Curran Opera House by wealthy billboard sign owner James Curran, the venue featured opera, musical productions, and silent movies. This amazing venue has undergone several ownership changes and renovations during the past century. Most recently, in 2010, the ownership of this venue was merged with another one of Boulder's iconic venues, the Fox Theater, and now both are operated by Z2 Entertainment. These two buildings remain the coolest and most desired indoor venues for any touring artist to perform in this region. And during the pandemic, you can support the venue and its employees by purchasing tickets to future shows or make a donation. On the venue website, you can learn more about some of the great swag you can get when you make a donation. So please do what you can. And also, the Boulder Theater is a member of NIVA, which stands for the National Independent Venue Association. And you can also help them by lobbying Congress vis-a-vis the Save Our Stages Now platform. Please, please make your voices heard with members of Congress. And speaking of Congress, today I also want to talk a little bit about headcount.org. Today is National Voter Registration Day. And if you've not already registered to vote, please do so. November 3rd is coming up, and it's going to be the most important election of our lifetimes. Regardless of what your politics are, please register to vote and exercise that right. Okay. Folks, without any further ado, let's get down to business. I am so pleased to invite two guests into the smartest people in the room today. First is RJB, the co-founder and CEO of Osiris Media. RJ's background is in storytelling and communications. He channeled his lifelong passion for music into the Helping Friendly podcast, which he co-founded in 2013. As CEO, RJ is responsible for leading and growing Osiris Media. He brings expertise in strategic growth, storytelling, and marketing, most recently as SVP of Hathaway Communications. RJ has a BA from The Ohio State University and a master's from the University of Chicago. And joining RJ today as his guest and the smartest people in the room is Mr. Tom Marshall. Tom is the primary lyricist and songwriter for the band Fish, with over 300 songs to his name. Tom also has a technical background, having graduated from Rutgers University with a BS in computer science. Tom recently completed the sale of his music company Lyric Machine to an Atlanta-based entertainment company. Tom is now a successful music podcaster, having launched Under the Scales in November 2016 and achieving more than 1 million downloads in its first season. Please help me welcome these amazing two guests to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, boys.
Well, thank you, Tom. That's quite a nice introduction, and from such a cool place there in Boulder. So thank you very much for that. And I know RJ and I were listening greedily, well, not greedily, jealously to your list of sponsors. That was some list, and that's our business, right? To get sponsors and advertisers. And that was an impressive list. So congrats on that. And thank you very much for having us on the show.
Yeah,
thank you for being here. And I'm happy to help with some sponsorship. We'll talk about that offline.
Yes. RJ, we could get started. RJ and I are going to ask each other a couple of questions just to get things going, and that you sort of do like a interview each other kind of thing, if that works. And I was thinking, RJ, you might just want to start by telling us a little bit about the Osiris origin story.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Tom. And thanks, Tom. This is fun. And thanks to everyone I'm watching the chat. There's a lot of our friends here and a lot of people we don't know. So thanks for tuning in, taking time out of your day. And thanks, Tom, for having us on. And thanks for Project Music for connecting us, which I'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later on. Yeah, so my background is in consulting, as Tom mentioned at the top. And in 2013, a friend and I started a Fish podcast called the Helping Friendly Podcast. We had no idea what we were doing. We didn't know anything about podcasting. We barely knew anything about recording. We definitely didn't know anything about editing. And we started just having conversations and recording them and putting them out on the internet with some music. And surprisingly, people started listening, and people still listen. We've been doing it for, I don't know, going on 8 years, and people still tune in. You know, thousands of Fish fans listen to us talk about Fish every couple of weeks. But I realized that, you know, there's a lot of music fans out there who really want to hear about their favorite bands or talk about their favorite bands or music. And right around that time when I was thinking about that, I met Tom through a mutual friend. and he was going to start a podcast, and we pretty much immediately became friends and started talking about whether there was an opportunity to bring more music related podcasts together as a business, but also just to like pool our audience and pool the potential for monetization and to get advertisers. And yeah, that was Tom and I met in 2016. So it's been several years that we were working on this, and then we launched in early 2018, and a bunch has happened since then, which we'll get into. But it's interesting. I mean, the biggest thing is that we have a lot of fans, you know, a lot of music fans who come to us and send us messages and iTunes reviews and just say like, this is making my life better. And it's really cool to see. And I think we're just trying to stick to making awesome content for music fans. So that's kind of the quick story. Tom, can you tell us about why you started your podcast and maybe what you've learned since jumping into the podcast world?
Sure. I got in on the listener side, and I didn't know about your podcast at the time. And I think it was 2015. I started listening to a hilarious fish podcast called Analyze Fish. And it was a fan trying to convince a non-fan to like fish. And the thing is, both of these guys, both of the hosts were amazing comedians, Harris Whittles and Scott Aukerman. So hilarity ensued, and I loved it. And when that podcast ended, I felt like there was a blank space where a podcast should be, as far as the fish audience went anyway. So that was the beginning of the idea. The concept for Under the Scales was that my insider status could grant me access maybe to some of the people who helped create fish, not just the band and the management, but more like I could dispel some of the mystery surrounding fish and find some of the fans and people behind the scenes who contributed greatly to the larger fish ethos, you know, some of whom even created their own careers and businesses because of fish. And as to what I've learned, well, I learned that podcasting brings more immediate fame and recognition than writing lyrics. That could be because fish continues to grow, and I'm luckily still writing songs with Trey. But there seemed a moment maybe in 2017 when Osiris really started its growth spurt, where suddenly my relative anonymity vanished. And speaking of Osiris and growth, RJ, maybe you can tell us a little bit how the company has evolved since we first met.
Yeah, and that is amazing. When Tom and I get to go to fish shows together, I definitely notice that people come up to you and talk about the podcast. And there's still the people who thank you for Waste and other songs, but the podcast, and it's not a video podcast, so it's interesting that it is drawing such attention. But and we now see people at shows all the time who listen to one or more of our 40 some podcasts at this point. It's really cool to see. So we went through a lot of early, I guess, pivots. We definitely started with the idea of music and how you get music into podcasts, because, you know, as anyone who has paid attention to this knows, it's still like a very gray area and a big opportunity. And then we went to like the idea of creating a network of existing shows. And now in this current iteration, which I think is the strongest, we're focusing more on becoming a podcast studio with original content and creating shows like After Midnight, which was about Fish's show at Big Cypress, or Festival Circuit about the history of the New Orleans Jazz Fest. So there's a lot that's changed, but I helped build a company before, but I was the second in charge. So this is my first time really building a startup, and it's like climbing a mountain. It's like really thrilling all the time, like pretty much always scary, and like constant uphill pushing. But like, I guess I should stop and look around at the scenery more often, because there's like a lot of cool stuff we do, but we just keep pushing, you know, and we keep growing. And we're about to close a round of investments, which includes some people from the music industry. And so I feel like we, in terms of our evolution, one of the most notable things is that we've been able to really get the attention of people in the music industry, and podcasters and journalists and people who are paying attention to music. So in that way, it's a really cool evolution that we've been a part of. And hopefully the beginning of a lot more. Building a startup is fun, and Tom's done it before, so you have more experience than I do with it, but man, it's a crazy roller coaster. Tom, do you maybe let's talk about the beginning of Osiris a little bit, because you actually gave me a lot of really good advice and feedback early on in terms of investment and all kinds of specifics about building a company. But pretty much right away, you said that I should be CEO, and I said that sounds great, and that was our first of many unanimous agreements. And that could have been really difficult if like you had wanted to also be CEO, but we've had this division of labor that continues to this day. That's really, I think, pretty beneficial. But you've had other experiences with other kinds of startups. What do you think is different about Osiris, or can you talk about that kind of the benefit of doing it the way we have done it?
Definitely. I mean, I've been in a couple startups and failed attempts where two founders shared CEO duties. And possibly because of my songwriting and just any type of work that I do, I tend to collaborate. Anything I create, I'm a collaborator by nature. And creating something is super personal. And to be a good collaborator, you also have to know when to step aside and let the other person run free. So even though, as RJ said, I knew he'd be a better CEO than I would, it's a skill set that I don't have, nor do I really want. But I also knew through RJ's former management consulting business, Hadaway, that he mentioned in DC, that he helped grow to enormous success, that he did have the CEO magic and just needed to be set on the runway. I'm not giving myself the credit for launching you, RJ, as a CEO, but I did have confidence in you from day one. That said, we overlapped a lot. We took all important calls together and we made every business decision together. And there's something great about that and reassuring, especially early on in the company. But it finally took several conversations between us over the past year in particular. The last one was quite recently in RJ's backyard of his new home, where we finally realized that the constant checking in with each other was actually a hindrance. And it takes trust to say, go for it. If you can make maybe 90% of these decisions without having to check in with the other person, it's freeing and the business moves a lot faster. And I felt it, and we both knew it from the beginning, but it's something that really has only recently been implemented, and it's already quite evident. And that said, RJ, what would you say the biggest challenges we're currently facing are as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone who follows the podcast industry, we have challenges that are pretty similar to others in the space. I mean, discoverability is interesting because it's becoming harder and harder to find podcasts and then to find good podcasts. I read something yesterday that, something like close to 1 million podcasts have been launched in 2020. So the number of podcasts that show up continue to just expand exponentially. And it's interesting that like to really have good discoverability, you need a lot of time, you need a lot of marketing smarts, you need a lot of creative, and you have to have like good ideas that stick out. So that's one thing. And the monetization side, we have sponsors. We talked about that up front. We need more, but the way that podcasts have monetized since, this became an industry is just it's a really challenging place to be. And I think a lot of the people we talk to, including some of our investors, say that they think the whole framework is just broken and doesn't really work. Part of it is that, podcasts are really best, I think, consumed in like a niche space. So the fish fan community is a perfect example. There's a lot of really passionate fish fans, but that's not at the scale of, someone who's wants to listen to Beyonce talk, right? So, but at the same time, these fans, especially the advertisers that we work with, our advertisers are seeing amazing results from the campaigns because our fans are really passionate and really focused on what we're doing, and they trust us and they trust the products we promote. And so I think that kind of imbalance between like the size of the reach of podcasts along with what people are actually interested in and how motivated the audience is totally out of balance. So that's a huge challenge in podcasting that I think probably will be addressed in some way, but it's a growing industry. And I think that's another thing that I've learned, and Tom, I don't know if you feel the same. I feel like when we started Osiris, we were like, okay, podcasting is a growing industry. And I feel like the longer that we're doing it, the more I'm realizing that it's the very beginning. it's still the very beginning. And like when, 4 years ago was like even before the beginning. I just feel like we're not, this industry hasn't even really started yet, which is really exciting.
That's a good thing that a lot of growth might be before us still, which is awesome, especially when you're starting a company. You want to hear that. I understand that I just was able to click on the panel and see there's an incredible side conversation going on. Heather McLaughlin and of course Linda Lawrence, I see, and Brian Zisk, and hello everybody whose name I recognize and who tuned in. Thank you very much. Say hi to Woody Armstrong as well. RJ, can you, we should probably at the end take some of the panelists' questions if you want, but for now, what would you say like our biggest wins?
I feel like there are a lot, and we should reflect on them more. Like when I was talking about building a company, you keep pushing forward, and I think reflecting on this stuff is important, and I should do it more. Right now, I think our team is just incredible. We went through some challenges at the start of the pandemic, and no one said a thing. Everyone just kept working hard and kept putting out amazing content. And now we have a growing team of people who are really just committed to making amazing music content. So I feel like that's our biggest win, like building an amazing, small, really motivated team. And I think the original content, which I talked about a little bit, which is, if anyone who's watching, it seems like based on the chat that people have listened to After Midnight, which was our first real original series with narration and interviews and sound design and music. And our team, Jesse Jarnow, who was the host and narrator, and Matt Dwyer, who did all the editing, and many people on our team helped get that going. But that was like a huge win, because to me, it showed us that we can create really cool stories. And up to that point, it's, most people think about podcasting as, two people talking, mostly two white dudes talking, which is traditionally and still kind of how it goes. So being able to create really cool stories, I think, was a big revelation that we could keep doing that. And that's what's, I think, brought us the most growth and the most brand recognition over the past, almost year since we launched After Midnight. Tom, do you remember like feeling any differently when After Midnight came out? Like, was that notable to you?
I think it definitely was a turning point. It also internally for the company, it was a big, it was kind of like a home run that we needed right then.
Yeah.
And so many people from industry in particular, and like Fish's first manager, John Paluska, calling me personally to say that was the best podcast I've ever heard. That kind of thing really, really hit home.
Yeah. We got so many notes like that. It's amazing. And so we're going to continue to make those kinds of shows, and they take longer to make. They take more time and money to create and to do well. But I think it's definitely the best way to deliver quality content to our fans. So Tom, you throughout this, you always have a lot of projects going. You have like a couple different, projects you're working on, and you're writing songs. I'm just curious, has podcasting or starting Osiris, has that affected your songwriting, or have there been any times that you remember that, this experience so far has affected the songs you're writing?
Well, as I said before, podcasting's definitely made me more approachable, or at least recognizable in the Fish audience, which is interesting. But as far as like songwriting itself, I like to think that hasn't been affected. I go to great lengths to kind of write songs the same way I always have and not think about the end result. I don't feel like having this additional or more focused additional audience, podcast audience, affects my writing. In fact, when I write, it's not really for an audience. It's for me at first anyway. And I can't listen to feedback or respond to what I think someone wants, because I would just grind to a halt. I couldn't really write that way.
Have you, Tom, have any of has your Fish experience changed? I guess the being recognized more for podcasting, but seeing shows now that you've spent, I don't know, hundreds of hours interviewing people about Fish, has your concert going experience changed at all?
No, again, I think it's just I can't really blend in to the crowd as well, which is fine. I love being out amongst people because they're fellow fans, and we're all there for the same reason. But no, it's kind of made me listen maybe better to what people are saying, and what's the most popular song at the time. Probably made me a better fan too, overall.
Yeah, I think it's interesting hearing, I feel like recently over the past few years, we've heard Trey specifically, but the whole band talk more about the community and about this community that's been kind of created around the band. And that's just kind of happened to coincide with this period that we've been growing our fan community. So I feel like that's part of it is seeing people in person who you talk with about the shows they like, but it's also just it does feel like a closer, the longer the Fish goes on, the more it feels like a close-knit community. And it's cool to be part of that. Hopefully we can get that community back together soon.
Yep.
Soon. So Tom, we talked a little bit about the shows that we're looking at and focusing more on original content, and as a creative director and the lead on this stuff, can you talk a little bit about the show development process and how we think about that?
Sure. So some ideas come from you guys from outside. We're inundated with new show ideas, and it's fantastic. But we have so many now, which is amazing. And some are great, and some of course aren't. And we've actually had to create new systems to deal with how to process new requests and ideas, like how far along is the podcast in development? Are they even a podcast yet? Can we hear a demo? That kind of thing. And if we feel there's like alignment with our team and the idea is new enough that it's not just adding to dialogue that's out there already, then we'll adopt it and help nurture and develop and produce it. Some podcasts come to us fully realized and just need a team to help publish it. Comes a Time is one of our recent success stories. And that has Oteil Burbridge and Mike Fenoya. And that was like that. It was ready to go pretty much. And so was our daily video show, 420 Live with Jeff Kravitz. He was ready to go. He just needed a team. So, and then others we create from the ground up. And I agree that our proudest moment as a company still might be the podcast series After Midnight we talked about. It was just tons of work and endless interviews, and we distilled them into a great show about Big Cypress, the most amazing concert ever, I think, Fish's concert, the New Year's Big Cypress Festival over New Year's 1999. But we also have Festival Circuit, which is incredible. RJ hosts, and the first season's about Jazz Fest, New Orleans Jazz Fest. But it really does come down to the incredible team at Osiris that RJ has built. It's a perfect combination of idea people and execution people, I'd say, although we're still small enough so that really everyone has to still be both. But the future shows we're working on right now are incredibly exciting. I'll mention one that got sidelined by the coronavirus. It's called Jam Just Happened. And it's a combination live show and live webcast, but then a subsequent podcast. And the live part featured the amazing guitarist Scott Metzger, forming a different band each time and just jamming with no script or even rehearsal, just a jam session among great fellow musicians. And there was a hunger for this. And we sold out our small club in the Lower East Side of Manhattan immediately, twice. And then the virus hit. So I feel like that's an unrealized podcast, or potential right there is so strong for that. But we have great plans on the live side of music too, when the virus cloud finally lifts. Speaking of new podcasts, RJ, do you want to talk a little bit about how we pitch artists who might want a podcast?
Sure, yeah. And I will say a couple of the ones you mentioned earlier. I made the point about discoverability, and it's really hard to sift through podcasts to find something good. And part of what I think we think makes a good podcast just starts with a great idea. And there comes a time podcast, which is Oteil and Mike Fenoya, as you mentioned, Tom. That was so interesting because they had the intention from the beginning to not just make it about music. They wanted to make it about music and social justice and culture and that doesn't really exist. And I think that's it's a pretty amazing conversation. They just did an episode that came out on Friday called Let's Talk About Race. And Oteil's perspective as an African-American musician and activist, I mean, I was blown away by the kind of insight that he had. And those are the kind of shows that we get really excited about. And the Jeff Kravitz show that you mentioned as well, like Jeff he knows everyone, and he has such specific knowledge about going to shows. He's up in the front taking pictures. He's not like me. I just go in and sit wherever I can and watch the show. And his conversations are great, but he also has just such a unique perspective. So I think that helps people discover these shows when they're a little bit different than what's already out there. The artists, it's interesting because some of these artists have come to us with podcast ideas, which is part of our plan to just continue building our brand, and people will see us as a place to come to get their podcast out there. And we've heard from David Crosby and Trey and other people that, podcasting has helped them tell stories more effectively or in ways they couldn't before. And our whole mission is to deepen the connection between musicians and their fans through this content. And, we tell artists and artists who don't know, this is an intimate place to talk and tell stories. There's no time or space constraints. It's not like a 30-second spot on radio or in a quote in a news story. You can really you can have a conversation, and you can promote music. You can kind of talk about other stuff you're doing in addition to just the music you're putting out there. And whenever I talk to people who have, a manager who has an artist that wants to do a podcast, it's they have to be willing to go deep and to really commit. Because I think some people think that it's maybe a good way to make a little bit of extra money or to do a quick promo of an album. And as you know, Tom, and as we know, building a podcast takes a long time, and building an audience takes a long time, even if you come in with one, So in podcasting, it's like you were saying about being inundated with ideas. I feel like if we were accountants, we wouldn't have people emailing us I have this really cool new accounting tool you should check out, or this new idea for how to do your job. But for us, every day there's tons of people telling us they have a podcast idea, and everyone has a podcast idea. And we try to pay attention to every single one, because you don't want to just dismiss ideas because you don't think off the top of your head that they're going to work. So I feel like that's going to be a bigger part of our jobs going forward, is sifting through ideas and really helping people develop them. And our team is helping do that. But artists, I think this is a great way for artists to connect with fans. So that to me is an easy pitch, but it really takes a commitment of time.
RJ, something you said kind of made me think about this. The little bit that we can get out now and then, go eat in a socially distanced place with some friends. I finally started seeing some pals. I'm really regretting that we're about to go back into the cold season. I have no idea how I'm going to handle that, but every one of them, almost to a person, says to me, and I'm wondering if they say the same thing to you, if you've gotten to hang out with friends lately, is that they think that COVID-19 would help the podcast industry, because everyone's at home, right? Glued to their computer, or they're searching for media, searching for something to do. And I kind of have to, well, why don't you tell us what it's really done to the podcast industry?
Sure, yeah. I mean, first, I mentioned this briefly earlier. I mean, there was a time when we realized that, investment, advertisement, and the things that we were counting on for income just suddenly were not going to happen. And that happened to literally almost every business in the world besides Zoom and, others that provide people with something at home. But I think it was 20 to 25% drop off in listening at the beginning of the pandemic across most podcast platforms and most podcast studios, which is just incredible. And I think we kind of thought at first that it would be really amazing for podcasting, because people would be sitting at home with nothing to do. And it really was just the profound thing was the complete upending of people's routines, that we we discovered that a couple weeks in. I mean, it wasn't that hard to figure out, but to see how much people's routines were affected to the point where like podcasting was at the bottom of their list of things to figure out. You know, first it was like, am I going to die? Like, is my family safe? Is my job safe? It's sort of that like Maslow's hierarchy. You start with like, is my physical health and my family safe? And then once you start figuring out your own routine, then it started coming back. And we're back to our kind of pre-pandemic numbers. And I think a lot of podcasts are, but the costs, you know, and the revenue stuff that happened was really unfortunate, but totally, I feel lucky that we have weathered it. And Tom, you remember we did a lot of experiments with video early on, because we were thinking that if we can get, you know, if we can get artists who are at home to do interviews and play a couple songs, then maybe that will help, you know, get new content out there to fans and keep artists engaged. And that was an idea that we had along with like almost every musician on the planet. And you saw this like wave of live streams come in March. And at this point, that's sort of moving more toward like the drive-in socially distanced concerts. And I think, you know, more bands are doing that now, although there are still live streams every day, of course, but that's, it's interesting how much people have tried to like weather this musically and tried to figure out what's the best way to perform as a musician and what's the best way to absorb music. I'm curious for our audience, like if people feel that their podcast listening or music listening or other kind of music consumption went down, because I'm sure that is a pattern that you all, hopefully no one stopped listening to Osiris podcast. I'm sure, you know, no one on this chat would. But one positive thing was the artist availability. You know, that's like we saw that people who were touring, you know, constantly or constantly working on new projects and in the studio and traveling were suddenly stuck at home. And so I think for the festival circuit New Orleans show, where we did a deep dive on the New Orleans Jazz Fest, we were able to talk to musicians that we may not have been able to talk to if they were doing regular touring schedules, or at least it would have been, you know, a little bit harder to nail down. So that was pretty cool. And I don't know, it's, I don't know where we go from here with, you know, the world with pandemic and podcast listening and live music, but it feels like we're in a totally different place than we were in March.
I just saw the band Ripe, R-I-P-E, from Boston. They're great. I guess they would put themselves in the jam band category. And it kind of occurred to me, these people, so that was at a farm, a socially distanced venue, a private farm, and there were ropes and everyone sat in the middle in their own pods, and you couldn't leave there except to go to the bathroom with your mask on. But there was waitress service. It was really it was incredibly well done, and that was a lot of fun. But it got cold, and again, I started thinking, this is all gonna go away again, and I'm worried about it. And it also made me realize you have to be a certain size for that to be economically feasible. Fish won't appear at a farm, you know what I mean? And the really big bands can't economically do it, I don't think. But speaking of jam bands, RJ, how are we as Osiris, how are we expanding into other genres? Because our home base is jam bands. Our wheelhouse is jam bands. How do we expand out?
Yeah, well, this is a big topic that we think about a lot, and we talk about a lot with our team and advisors and investors. I mean, as people on here know, it seems like there's a lot of Fish fans and fans of Osiris on here. So as you know, we started in the jam band space, and from the beginning, we had like a graphic of concentric circles in terms of expanding into other genres. And that's still the way I think about it. We sort of started to go into bluegrass and folk and jazz, and now indie rock and classic rock. And I think eventually we'll get into country and hip hop and pop music, and all being guided by one principle, which is deepening people's connection to the music they love. Because, you know, I think there's really passionate music fans like we are of Fish of every band out there. You know, there must be a similar crowd of Taylor Swift fans to the, you know, Helping Friendly podcast for Fish. I don't think there's a podcast yet, but that's kind of how I think about expanding into other genres. But we still have to have overlap with our current audience because people love hearing about, the Grateful Dead and Fish and other jam bands. We're part of a project called Project Music, which is a music incubator based in Nashville. That's how Tom Truitt and I got connected. And they are introducing us to tons of people in Nashville and in the country music scene, but also in music generally. Tom and I are mostly based in New York, Philadelphia. So a lot of our networks are based in the Northeast. So just meeting people who work at some of the same companies that we know in New York, but just working in Nashville and having a connection to this really rich music community that we didn't have a connection to before has been really fascinating. I've been introduced to artists as well through people in Nashville like Maggie Rose and others who I think, we're using this show called Past, Present, Future Live to kind of just expand into other genres, and talking to people like Maggie and tons of other artists has been really fun. And so that's been really cool. And the Project Music kind of network is really helpful. And we're currently exploring working with a bunch of new people. I mentioned we have a new round of investment that's closing, and we're definitely going to work with a company based in New York called Premier Music, who is going to help us with brand strategy and strategic partnerships in music supervision, introducing us to brands and to artists who want to get into podcasting. And that's a huge step forward for us in terms of expanding it outside of the jam band world. But I will tell anyone listening or watching that we won't abandon the jam band fans. We'll just continue to add to it. But we have a lot of cool stuff in the works that'll help us get into bigger genres and bigger fan bases, but also still guided by that, passionate music fan perspective. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time, despite the world being like almost completely on fire in many different ways. We're doing okay here in our like small corner of the world, which is a great distraction for me from the world, being able to do what we're doing and do something that we love. I don't know, Tom, if you feel equally distracted, but it's nice to have something that's rewarding and interesting to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is my full-time job as it is yours, and so distraction into podcasting is a good thing for me. But my problem is getting distracted out of my current job. And that's what I used to do when I was like a programmer or whatever. I would be distracted into writing lyrics. But so I've always had that. There's a couple of questions from panelists. I was looking. My question is, what inspired Tom to write the lyrics for Stash off Picture of Nectar? Oh my God, that's that's one of those ones that it just sort of flowed off the ink flowed onto the paper without a whole lot of brain power being transferred there. That was one I wrote a lot just sort of for the rhyme and for the meter. And that's one that's one of the ones of maybe 2 or 3 songs that RJ and I have talked about that when it's played, I sometimes sort of regret that I didn't spend a little more time looking back at that lyric and making it a little bit more possibly meaningful. That question was Leonard Pinello. Thank you. And under it, let's see, Linda Lawrence says a type of podcast she'd like to hear more of are stories of creativity of songs and music and the people that create them. RJ, and the people who collaborate in them. RJ, there's a couple podcasts out in the world. We really like one called Song Exploder, which talks about the creative process of a song. Are we doing anything along those lines, RJ? Because I know that there was some proposed to us, very interesting ones. Have any taken hold?
Yeah, I think we're looking at doing a show on album exploration, but from a kind of music fan perspective. There's a few of those out there that are more from like the music critic journalist perspective. We're thinking about doing, I don't know how much I can tell, but basically doing anniversary albums and looking at an album over a period of time and looking at the legacy and the impact, talking to the musicians who were on the album, the producers, people who've been influenced by it. Yeah, Song Exploder is definitely one that sticks out. And it's interesting because people who follow the podcast industry know the kind of the thing that investors are most interested in terms of podcasting are things that can be turned into other mediums, TV shows, movies. That's happened a lot in the true crime genre and in the fiction genre. And Song Exploder just released a Netflix trailer, and Song Exploder is going to turn into a Netflix TV series, which is kind of the perfect, story for a show like that. And we're thinking about that as well. So it's not just like, what can we put out there now, but it's what could this become in the future. Yeah, there's a lot of ideas, we have to consider also the ability. I think one lesson we've learned is that doing a limited series, 5 episodes on Big Cypress, that was a huge amount of work. And then without having a second season of that lined up, we sort of lost the momentum of that audience, So when we're thinking about new shows, we're thinking about things that can be ongoing, multi-season projects, which also helps kind of refine the ideas that we throw out there. Tom, can I ask a question? We've heard a lot, I've heard a lot from musicians about how they've spent their time during the pandemic, and people who've gone through different spurts in creativity and non-creativity. What's the songwriting flow been like for you during the past, whatever, I guess it's been 6 months at this point?
So judging by the output of music that I'm involved with, it would seem like it's been an incredibly creative time for me because the first thing that happened, as you know, in March, Fish released Sigma Oasis, and I'm credited on 9 out of 10 songs on that. And that was, that was stuff that had already been recorded and mixed and everything, and not planned for release until actually next month, this coming Halloween in October. So I'm so excited that Fish made that decision and released it in March, right when we all needed it. We were confused, worried, all quarantined, and it was perfect. And so I was proud of that. And then shortly following, right on its footsteps almost, Trey released an album a couple months later called Lonely Trip. And on there, my friend and I, Scott Herman, are credited with, I don't know the exact number, but I think we have 12 or 13 out of a lot of songs on there as well. And so, like I said, it would seem like I'm doing a whole lot of lyric writing during the pandemic. That actually was, a lot of those songs came from a writing session that really sort of backed right into the pandemic. I think it was early March or very, very late February. Trey, Scott, and I were down in Annapolis in a really cool house on the water, and we were just writing and writing and writing. And it was right when the news started coming in, and I remember Trey was so worried about, we got some takeout food, and he opened it up, and it was salad. And I think that some news had come in that salad, because of the handling that it takes to create salad. So he threw this beautiful salad in the garbage, and I was just like, what is going on? But then, of course, more insanity ensued, and possibly he was right. I don't know. So all those songs really came from right before the pandemic. Since then, I've just been doing my own thing, which is compiling ideas, writing down lyrics, getting ready, hopefully, for Trey to say, hey, Tom, you got any songs? And then I'll send him a whole bunch.
There's a question here from Bob Squance. Is the barn as special of a place as it seems?
It is. RJ, you might come up with the name of the guy, Lawrence. He's the artist up there. You might know. Oh man, he's involved with a lot of the festivals of Fish. He's kind of one of the artistic guys. Anyway,
Russ
yes.
Bennett or
no, another one. Anyway, what's that? Did you have another?
No,
guess?
but I know we interviewed him for After Midnight, and now I'm
yes,
sad
that guy.
Can't remember his name.
So anyway, barns in Vermont. Vermont's one of the poorest states, and unfortunately, as you drive around Vermont, you can see barns falling down all the time. So people with really good sense of art, but also construction people who know the value of like an old hand-hewn beam will often approach farmers that could use the money for barn parts. And I guess this guy, I want to say Lawrence Fisk, is that possibly?
Lars Fisk.
Lars Fisk had stockpiled amazing parts from fallen down barns and churches. And so Trey had this piece of land with a beautiful mountain on it. And Lars basically helped build the barn, which is a studio on the very top of this mountain. And yes, it's incredibly special. It's got stained glass from an old church. It's got hand-hewn beams from Vermont barns from before the 1800s. It's got paneling on both sides. I guess the way they do barns in Vermont is the insulation's in between, and when you're inside the barn, you see an old barn wall, and the outside you see an old barn wall, and then the insulation's inside. So no matter what side you're looking at it, it looks old, even though it's kind of new, and it's beautiful. And the thing they never show, which I loved the most about it, you always see pictures, of course, of the band, and the photographer, I wish, would just sort of look up and show what's above, because I think it was Lars, out of rebar, built this amazing skywalk along the top of a very, very high barn. It might be 40 feet, 35 feet ceilings, way up there. And right up to the cupola, which is like, the 4-windowed thing to let light in. He built this like really beautiful bridge out of rebar. It hangs suspended up there. And then at the very end of it, there's like an electric little lift from some industrial factory that you ride the last little bit up, and it becomes the floor of the cupola. So you can get up there and you can see 360 degrees from the very top of the mountain. It's an amazing, magical place. And so, yes, it's really special. And I also know Trey built now himself a separate little building, little home there as well. So he can spend some time up there also. It's a very, very special, amazing, beautiful place.
Thanks for describing that. I hope
Sure.
that was a good question, Bob. I want to answer one of Linda's questions, because this is interesting. I hadn't thought about this in a while, which is how many hours did it take to produce After Midnight versus a podcast like Under the Scales or Helping Friendly Podcast? And I think, Tom, you might have a different approach for Under the Scales, but for the Helping Friendly Podcast, between planning, recording, editing, it's probably 4 to 5 hours max per episode. And for After Midnight, like, it was probably with, multiple people hours, probably like 70 to 100 hours an episode, all in between writing, scripting, interviewing, editing, production. So any of those original scripted series it's exponentially more work. But thanks for asking that, Linda. And I also want to answer one other question, which is what kind of data we have on our listeners. It's really interesting because there's basically the podcast industry is so far behind any other digital medium in terms of being able to track data. We don't have any info on our listeners besides just the potentially location, definitely like the country they listen from, the kind of program they listen from, and some people are able to like target by zip code or state. That's basically it. We don't get names, we don't get email addresses, we don't get device information. Apple and Spotify collect that on the, people who listen to podcasts on their platforms, but they do not share that stuff with people like us. So the best data we have is based on qualitative research and, surveys that we do once a year. So it's kind of amazing to people who are, especially people who come from a data, background, and ask like, what kind of data do you have on your listeners? And we're like, not much. I think that's surprising to a lot of people. Tom, do you want to answer another question if I throw one out there?
If you have one, sure. I was combing through. I do want to say hi to Gerald. He's our pseudo lawyer. He's helped us with some law stuff. Hey, Gerald.
Hey, Gerald.
No questions from Gerald yet. Yeah, go ahead, RJ, if you found a good one.
Tom Truitt asked, as a songwriter, what are your thoughts regarding copyrights in podcasts or using copyrighted material in podcasts? Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I think it's tremendously difficult for podcasters to get music played legally in their podcasts. Uh, for example, well, so I have a handshake agreement with Fish, which is play very little of the music. That's kind of our agreement. And then we won't, we won't cause any trouble for you, and it won't cause any trouble for us. And the reason is they own all their music completely. If it was like owned by, I don't know, another publisher, or if there's a record label involved and all this, playing even Fish music, if they had like more than 2 or 3 stakeholders involved, it would actually be a legal conundrum whether or not I could even play music that I wrote the lyrics for in my own podcast. It's very hard for podcasters to get stuff. We had a podcast, I won't name it, and it was we were trying to get the song "Beds Are Burning." That was going to be the name of it, and and how do RJ, sing it. You're a good singer. Anyway, how do we feel when the beds or whatever? That song, the artist, the singer, the band, the writer, all said yes, and even the manager was like, "Yes, we're gonna get this. That's so cool." The podcast is named "Beds Are Burning," and we get our song that people haven't heard in a long time in a podcast every 2 weeks. Awesome. With that thumbs up, we got shut down by, it was a record company, it was a label, it was someone, a publisher. And so long answer, Tom, to a short question, which is there really needs to be some way that podcasters can put music legally into their podcast. It's a thing that we struggle with, as you can tell, daily. And actually, I think the Beds Are Burning, the way that they shut it down was, we were hoping that maybe we could pay them, $1,000 or $5,000 for a year-long license, something like that. And they came back with something like $5,000 every single time that we used it, which is just too much for us. So, that's how they shut that down. But guess who's unhappy? The writer of the song was unhappy. The podcaster's unhappy. Clearly a solution is needed.
Yeah, and that was kind of the first iteration of Osiris, which everyone we told about it, creating a licensing library for podcasts, everyone we told about it thought that it was an awesome idea and that it would take 10 years and millions of dollars. And I think someone will do that. I mean, it's really relationship based, I guess like most business things. It's, if you know the right people, you can figure it out. I mean, we've had situations where a label or a publishing company says it's going to cost X, which X is way more than we want to pay. And then the next day, because a manager called that person, they say you can actually use it for free. So there's certainly no tried and true way. There's not a document you fill out. And so many people hadn't done it before. So it's interesting. And as Brian just said, I mean, we've learned from the beginning that this is like intentionally opaque, because this is an industry that is protecting, its assets. So, we understand that, but trying to work with more people who have the relationships and have the ability to kind of help us think it through is really useful. And that's some of the new investment that we have. I think some of the new people coming on board will help us with that.
Clearly, it can be solved though, because for example, in the music industry, they solved it with the Harry Fox industry. It's the Harry Fox agency. So if I have a band, like say Fish wants to cover a Rolling Stones song, they don't have to call people and ask, "Can I cover your song and put it on our album?" They just put it on, and then through this legal mechanism which exists, they just pay the proper preset royalty based on how many albums they sell. So that is the kind of thing we need to have in podcasting. We put the song in and then pay the royalty, a set royalty from some formula.
So Tom Truitt, I know we have to wrap up. We have one more question that, can we take one more question? Is that cool? Okay. This is from John Loomis. He said, first of all, thanks for this. Any guests we can expect coming up on Under the Scales? Being a software engineer myself, I really enjoy hearing about fish-related technologies. Tom, do you want to talk about anything about October, what we're doing for the month, or I can give a preview and you can add in?
Yes. So there's three big fish podcasts in Osiris: Under the Scales, Helping Friendly Pod, that's RJ's, and then we have Beyond the Pond. They all sort of have different angles on how they approach the fish phenomenon. And we decided to put our heads together in October and all tackle one common theme, and that's going to be Fall 2000, which is this era. It's a tour, but it was a tour that came after Big Cypress, kind of, and it was in the shadow of Big Cypress, but it also marked the beginning of the end of the beginning, I should say, because it was the very end of Fish 1.0. It was what happened right before they took their first hiatus, and it's a sort of a turbulent, interesting era of fish. So we're covering that next month, October.
Yeah, and the Helping Friendly podcast will be doing a dive into the shows, and Tom has interviewed two really awesome guests who will come on Under the Scales to tell us about that period. And Beyond the Pond is going to look at one specific jam from that era. So it's going to be fun.
Gentlemen, let me jump in here and first say thank you on behalf of all the fans out there who are listening in. This has been remarkable, and I am so pleased to have you on this platform. I also think that a number of the members of this audience can help you all with sponsorship and some of the other legal questions that you're asking, and I'm happy to make some of those connections. And then lastly, I want to sign off by simply saying what I said at the start, and that is today is voter registration day. Headcount.org can help you register to vote if you're not already, and by all means do vote on November 3rd. In fact, vote early and often. Vote before November 3rd. And then wear one of these. This is a face mask. And if you don't have one, you should be wearing them every day. And this is one that, as you can tell, is branded specifically for my passion. And I hope that you do the same. So again, thank you, gentlemen. Stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to supporting you as you continue to grow Osiris. It's going to be an exciting future.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. That was fun. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.